Welcome back. I got a comment the other day from Rhonda who writes, I would love to know what trees, especially fruit trees, you have planted. I live about 7 miles north of Interstate 10 on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I figure we must be in the same zone as you and want to plant some trees too. We have blueberries, blackberries, and strawberries, but want fruit trees too. This is a question that I get asked moderately often. What fruit trees grow here? What should I plant? Well, I'll tell you what, in the deep south, my favorite 3 trees for sheer ease of growth, productivity, and sheer ease of growth are mulberries, sand pears, and Japanese persimmons. Sand pears are the classic hard storage pear. A lot of people don't necessarily like them because they say, oh man, those things are so hard. They're not like those pears we had up north, etc. That's because you're not treating them properly. Okay, they are a hard pear that is made for processing. Pear sauce, like applesauce. Pear cider. Pear salsa, sliced pears and syrup. That sort of thing. Pear pie. That's awesome. But they are not a great fresh eating pear, usually. Number 2, the mulberry. The mulberry, man, that is the most productive, amazing tree. We're talking buckets of organic berries with almost no work, year after year after year. If you've tried to grow all those small berries like blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and blackberries, those take some work. They take support, or they take weeding, they take some care. It's not like that with a mulberry tree. You plant a mulberry tree, you get buckets and buckets of mulberries, buckets and buckets of fruit, and they produce very, very quickly. I highly recommend mulberries. Now, there are native mulberries called the red mulberries, which vary in flavor. Some of them are kind of okay, and some of them are not great. Some of them are fantastic. But there are varieties that have been bred to have better flavors, and I recommend those. Some of the black mulberries, some of the white mulberries are very good. And the taxonomy of mulberries is really confusing. Morus rubra, Morus alba, Morus nigra. Well, just don't get into all that. But when you say that it's a white mulberry tree, it doesn't necessarily mean that the fruit are white. It means that it's a Morus alba. And if you say it's a red mulberry, it doesn't mean that the fruit are actually red necessarily. It means that it is a Morus rubra, the native, but whatever, forget it. Anyhow, mulberries are super easy. So my number 2 is mulberries. And number 3 is the Japanese persimmon. This is the Fuyu persimmon. This isn't the puckery persimmon necessarily. You can get them in astringent versions and in non-astringent versions, meaning there's one version of the fruit that turns your mouth to cotton if you eat it. If you get it a little bit early, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like trying to swallow cotton balls. Super, super astringent, not a pleasant experience. However, if those astringent varieties go all the way to full maturity, so they're like almost pudding-like, the flavor is very complex and almost spiced and delicious. They're really great. But it's not as forgiving as the Fuyu persimmon, which is the more commonly planted of the Japanese persimmons. And the Fuyu is the beginner tree that I recommend. You can eat those things when they're still a little crisp and even not totally fully ripe, and they're good. You can eat them like apples, or you can wait until they get softer and eat them when they're soft. Those 3 trees right there are your basis of a great backyard orchard in the deep south. Now, if you are down zone 9, zone 10, the loquat becomes a very productive and useful tree. And I definitely recommend loquats, but I would try to get varieties that are cultivated varieties. Some of the seedling varieties are pretty good, but the loquat has been used extensively in the landscape industry, and not really as a fruit tree, but as a pretty ornamental, because it takes no work, it's evergreen, it's beautiful, but sometimes the fruit are more tart and unpleasant, or the pit is very large in them. And if you have had a cultivated, bred up variety of loquat, it is a different ball game. The fruit is larger, the pit is much smaller, and they are much sweeter, a much better experience off the tree. I've used a lot of seedling loquats in the past, have eaten them and preserved them and made liqueurs out of them and that sort of thing. They're good, they're useful, but they're not up to the quality of a cultivated variety. So if you are going to plant fruit trees, I highly recommend that you plant the easiest ones first, the encouraging trees. My book, Totally Crazy Easy Florida Gardening, was all based on this idea of planting the stuff, making a scaffold of super easy to grow plants and making them the backbone of your gardening and of your food supply first. Plant the super easy stuff. Don't plant the harder stuff. Not to begin with. You can play with those things, but make sure that you have secured that backbone of something easy. The super easy crops that will keep you fed, and these are the super easy fruit trees that will keep you fed. Now, beyond that, there are many, many other trees that grow in the area. If you want to get into growing some nuts, pecans are very good, and chestnuts are very good. Try to get the Dunstan chestnut if you can, because it is blight resistant with a large, sweet nut. Very, very good tree. And if you want to get into other fruit trees, of course, you can grow apples. Apples are a little touchy. They're not great in this area. You can grow peaches. Peaches are touchy. Peaches are like growing a vegetable. They need a lot of care. They need pruning. They need feeding, or else you tend to end up with a big, ratty, bushy peach tree, and they don't tend to last very long either. It's not a generational type tree. Sand pears are likely to last for decades and decades and decades, even if you ignore them, whereas peach trees are not. They tend to get rot issues, they have plum curculio issues, they have the trunk borers and all this kind of stuff. That kind of makes it difficult. Plus the squirrels are really, really good at stealing peaches for some reason. Don't not grow them because you're scared of them. Sure, go ahead and grow them, but if you want easy to grow tree, they're not it. Plums are a little easier than peaches in my experience, but they also tend to have issues with getting borers and with getting the fruit damaged by various things. It's a spectrum, right? So you start with the really easy stuff first, and you're gonna plant some other things. And I'm gonna give you a bonus easy tree right now. And that bonus easy tree is the fig. But I didn't put it as one of my top 3 because there are figs and there are figs. There are fig varieties that grow really well in California and make a lot of fruit, which don't really like the Deep South. For the Deep South, your 2 classic figs are Celeste and Brown Turkey, those 2. And then the LSU breeding program has released multiple other ones, and I was talking to Floribama Homestead yesterday when we were visiting, and he said that they used the Celeste fig as the basis of their breeding program because the Celeste is already a proven variety for the area. So figs, easy to grow, excellent. Just don't put them in a real wet spot. They like it kind of dry, and they like to be around rocks. I'm guessing because they're a Mediterranean plant. Put them near the rocks, they put their roots down, and they feel nice and anchored, and they're happy. If you grow them alongside a wall or alongside a building, they love that, and they thrive. But start with the easy stuff. Check out my book, Totally Crazy Easy Florida Gardening, for more details on growing in Florida in particular. And of course, you can follow this channel for advice for Lower Bama and all the way along the Gulf Coast area. I am in Zone 8, and I know what it's like to be in that kind of zone between the tropical and the temperate. And you can certainly grow a lot here. Start with the easy stuff. Put that backbone together, and then plant all the crazy fruit trees you want to plant, knowing that you have secured a food supply for decades into the future. Thanks for joining me. Catch y'all next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be green.
I'm driving with the top down, baby. Rain won't stop me. I'm high on black coffee, baby. Your blues won't rock me. I'm planting on the sea cone, baby. Some crows can't stop me. I'm cranking up the bass and